Tides of Deception. Chapter 1. The Return. The sun was slowly rising above the horizon, painting the sky and sea in delicate shades of pink and gold. Marina Volkova stood on the deck of the ferry, gazing at the approaching shore of Quiet Bay. A cool breeze tousled her dark hair, pulled back in a casual ponytail, carrying the familiar scent of salt and seaweed. 10 years had passed since she left this small coastal town in California, and now she was returning. No longer a teenager dreaming of the big world, but an accomplished oceanographer with a doctorate degree and experience in international expeditions. Marina felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. What awaited her at home? Had the town changed as much as she had? In the distance, she could already make out the silhouette of the lighthouse on Dolphin Point. Its white tower seemed to welcome her home, like a sentinel guarding the entrance to the bay. This lighthouse had witnessed so many events of her youth. First kiss, night swims with friends, long talks about the future. Marina smiled at her memories, but the smile quickly faded. She hadn't returned just to visit family, but with an important mission: to investigate changes in the local ecosystem. As the ferry docked, Marina picked up her worn backpack and descended onto the pier. She was greeted by the clamor of seagulls and the shouts of fishermen unloading the morning's catch. But something was off. There were fewer boats than she remembered, and the fishermen looked tired and worried. Marina frowned, making a mental note to inquire about this later. "Marina, is that really you?" A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see Tom Garcia, her high school friend, and now the deputy sheriff. His broad smile and warm brown eyes remained the same, though his hair now showed streaks of grey. He wore the deputy sheriff's uniform, which seemed to add to his solidity. "Tom, how great to see you!" Marina hugged her old friend, catching the familiar scent of his cologne. "You haven't changed a bit." "But you have, Sea Star," Tom laughed, using her childhood nickname. "Now you're a real scientist. The whole town's been talking about your return and this cool research project." They walked along the waterfront, and Marina noted the changes with surprise. New shops and cafes had appeared. The old fishing wharf had been transformed into a trendy marina for yachts. But behind the facade of renewal, there was a sense of tension, as if the town was trying to hide its problems behind a fresh coat of paint. "Tell me about the project," Tom asked, as they stopped by the parapet, looking out at the water. "Is it something to do with ocean pollution?" Marina nodded, her eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "Not just that. We'll be studying the entire bay ecosystem, from plankton to large marine mammals. Recent data shows strange changes in the populations of some species. We want to understand the causes." She fell silent, noticing Tom's frown. "What is it?" she asked. Tom looked around, as if checking if anyone was eavesdropping, and lowered his voice. "You know, this might be connected to our problems. In recent months, strange things have been happening here. Fishermen are complaining about a sharp decline in catches. Some species that have always been in our waters have almost disappeared." Marina felt a chill run down her spine. She had expected to find some changes, but not so dramatic. "And the local authorities, the fisher company, are they doing anything about it?" Tom gave a bitter chuckle. "The fisher company itself is on the brink of bankruptcy. There are rumors that John Fisher has gotten involved in some shady dealings, trying to save the business." "John Fisher?" Marina asked in surprise. The same one who always boasted he could catch the last fish in the ocean. The very same, Tom nodded. Only now he's not in a boasting mood. They approached the Volkov house, a small 2-story building with a view of the ocean. Marina's mother, Elena, was already standing on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her once dark hair was now almost completely grey, and there were more wrinkles on her face, but her eyes still shone with love. "Marina, my dear," she exclaimed, opening her arms. Marina hugged her mother, feeling the familiar scent of home-baked goods and sea salt. For a moment, she felt like a little girl again, coming home after a long day at school. "How are you, sweetie? Tired from the journey?" Eleanor gave her daughter a scrutinizing look. "You've gotten so thin. We'll have dinner now." "Mom, I'm fine. Really." Marina smiled. "Where's Dad?" Elena sighed, and in that sigh, Marina heard years of patience and love. "In the garage, tinkering with his boat. Since he retired, that's all he does." Marina nodded goodbye to Tom and entered the house. Everything was so familiar. Old photographs on the walls, the worn sofa in the living room, the creaky staircase to the second floor. But something had subtly changed. Maybe it was her. In the kitchen, Marina was helping her mother set the table when her father, Jack Volkov, came in. His once black hair had turned completely grey, and new wrinkles had appeared on his face. But his eyes still sparkled mischievously. He smelled of the sea and machine oil. "Well, hello there, little mermaid," he said, hugging his daughter. His voice carried a mix of pride and gentle mockery. "Done swimming around the world? Decided to return to your home port?" "Hello, Dad." Marina smiled, feeling a lump form in her throat. "I missed you, and our ocean too." "Ha!" Jack snorted. "Your ocean's not in the best shape these days. The fish have gone. Barely enough crabs for dinner." "Jack," Eleanor said warningly. "Not now." But Marina was already on alert, remembering her conversation with Tom. "What do you mean? The fish have gone. Tom mentioned something about this too." Jack sat heavily in a chair, his face turning serious. "Just what I said. The water's gotten murky, smells strange. Fishermen complain about empty nets. And Fisher, they say, runs his tankers at night. Something's not right there." "Jack!" Eleanor chided him again. "Enough gossip. Marina's just got back. Let her rest." But Marina could already feel her investigative interest awakening. Something was clearly wrong in her hometown, and she was determined to get to the bottom of it. In the evening, as she unpacked in her old room, Marina looked out at the ocean. The setting sun painted the water in shades of orange and purple, but even this beauty couldn't hide the troubling signs. The water did seem murkier than she remembered. On the horizon, she noticed the silhouette of a large vessel slowly moving towards the open sea. "Fisher's tanker?" Marina frowned, remembering her father's words. She took out her laptop from her backpack and opened files with data from recent studies of coastal water ecosystems. The numbers and graphs told a worrying story of increasing pollution levels and changes in species balance. Marina felt that her project might turn out to be much more important than she had initially thought. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to some movement on the shore. Marina squinted, trying to make out in the twilight the figure of a person walking quickly along the water's edge. The person was carrying something large and seemed to be in a great hurry. Marina felt a chill run down her spine. Her scientific mind said it could just be a fisherman returning from a late catch. But her intuition suggested that something unusual was happening. She closed her laptop and went to the window, peering into the darkening landscape. Quiet Bay had always been a symbol of home, safety, and natural beauty for her. Now she felt that beneath this peaceful surface lurked secrets and dangers. Marina took a deep breath, feeling the salty sea air fill her lungs. Her return home promised to be far more interesting and dangerous than she could have imagined. But she was ready to face these challenges. For now, at stake was not just a scientific study, but the future of her hometown and the entire bay ecosystem. With these thoughts, Marina went to bed, knowing that tomorrow would begin a new chapter in her life. A chapter full of mysteries, dangers, and perhaps important discoveries. Chapter 2: Death in the Depths. The shrill ring of the phone shattered the pre-dawn silence. Marina, having barely sunk into a restless sleep, startled awake and opened her eyes. Darkness still cloaked the world outside, with only a faint hint of the approaching dawn coloring the horizon in shades of grey. The clock showed 5:30 a.m. Tom's name flashed on the phone screen. Marina's heart clenched with a sense of foreboding. "Marina, sorry for the early call." Tom's voice was tense, like a taut string. "Can you come to the beach at Rocky Point? Something strange has happened." 20 minutes later, Marina was parking her old Ford in the deserted lot by the beach. The cold morning air, saturated with salt and iodine, burned her lungs. The sea was restless. Heavy leaden waves crashed against the coastal rocks with a thunderous roar, as if trying to tell their own dark story. In the distance, by the water's edge, Marina noticed a group of people and the flashing lights of police cars. The scene seemed surreal in the pale light of the breaking day. Marina shivered, and not just from the cold. Tom met her at the police cordon. His usually cheerful face was pale and haggard, his eyes red from lack of sleep and stress. "What happened?" Marina asked, feeling anxiety building inside her. Tom took a deep breath, as if gathering strength. "John Fisher is dead," he said, lowering his voice. "Fisherman found his body about an hour ago." Marina felt a chill run down her spine. Yesterday's conversation about Fisher's problems suddenly took on a sinister tone. "How did it happen?" she asked, trying to maintain professional composure. "Looks like an accident during night diving," Tom replied, but doubt was evident in his voice. "He had a harpoon and was in full diving gear." They approached the scene. John Fisher's body, covered with a tarp, lay on the sand. The edge of the tarp fluttered in the wind, as if trying to reveal the secret of his death. Police officers and medical examiners bustled around, their voices muffled, as if death itself demanded respect and silence. "Why did you call me?" Marina asked, looking around. Her scientific mind was already analyzing the scene, noting every detail. Tom took her by the elbow and led her aside, away from prying ears. His eyes anxiously scanned the shoreline, as if searching for invisible listeners. "Because something doesn't add up here," he whispered. "Fisher was an experienced diver. And why would he hunt at night in this weather?" Tom lowered his voice even more, almost to inaudibility. "Besides, the place where he was found, it's not far from the area where his company allegedly dumps waste illegally." Marina frowned, feeling the pieces of the mysterious puzzle starting to come together in her head. You suspect murder? I don't suspect anything, Tom quickly replied, but his eyes said otherwise. I need a fresh perspective. You're a scientist, you know the sea. Maybe you'll notice something we've missed. Marina nodded and began to examine the crime scene. The sand held traces of the night's drama. Footprints of rescuers and police officers, marks from stretchers. But among this chaos, she noticed something strange. Barely discernible tracks that looked like those left by heavy equipment. Moving along the shore, Marina carefully studied every stone, every shell. Suddenly, something glinted in the wet sand. She bent down and picked up a small piece of glass with some kind of marking. Tom, she called. Look at this. The deputy sheriff came over and carefully examined the find. His eyebrows furrowed. Looks like part of laboratory glassware, he remarked. But what's it doing here? They were interrupted by a loud voice that cut through the morning air like a knife. What's an outsider doing here? A tall man in an expensive suit, out of place on the beach, was approaching them rapidly. His face was red with anger, his eyes flashing with fury. Michael! Tom straightened up, his posture becoming defensive. This is Marina Volkova. I don't care who she is. Michael Fisher, the deceased son, cut him off. His voice trembled with barely contained rage. This is a crime scene, and I demand that all unauthorized persons leave immediately. Marina felt a wave of indignation rising inside her, but forced herself to speak calmly. Michael, she said softly. My condolences. I'm just trying to help. Help? Michael sneered, but there was no mirth in his laugh, only bitterness and anger. How can you help? My father died in an accident. There's nothing to investigate here. Marina noticed Tom's slight frown at these words. Tension hung in the air, thick and heavy, like the stuffiness before a storm. All right, she said conciliatorily, realizing that now was not the time for confrontation. I'll go, but if you need me, you know where to find me. As she left the beach, Marina could feel Michael Fisher's piercing gaze on her. She turned around, and for a moment their eyes met. His gaze held a mix of pain, fear, and something else, something dark and dangerous. The sun had finally risen above the horizon, flooding the beach with golden light. But even this beauty couldn't dispel the gloomy atmosphere of the tragedy that had occurred. Marina got into her car, her thoughts swirling like seagulls over the sea. Something about Michael's behavior was unsettling. Why was he so sure it was an accident? And what really happened last night on this deserted beach? Returning home, Marina immediately sat down at her laptop. She decided it was time to dig deeper. Loading a map of the bay, she marked the spot where Fisher's body was found and the areas of suspected illegal dumping. The picture that began to emerge was troubling. Marina opened a new document and began to compile a list of questions and facts. Why would an experienced diver go to sea in a storm? Are Fisher's death and the bay's environmental problems connected? What does the piece of laboratory glass on the beach mean? Why is Michael Fisher so aggressively reacting to the investigation? She leaned back in her chair, looking at the screen. Each answer seemed to generate a dozen new questions. Marina realized that her research project might turn out to be much more dangerous than she had initially thought. Outside, it started raining again. Droplets tapped on the window as if transmitting a secret message in Morse code. Marina went to the window and looked out at the raging sea. Somewhere out there, in the dark waters of the bay, lay the answers to all the questions. And she was determined to find them, no matter the cost. The secrets of Quiet Bay were waiting to be uncovered, and Marina felt she was on the brink of something big and dangerous. But it was too late to turn back now. Too much was at stake here. A man's life, the future of an entire town, and the fate of a unique marine ecosystem. With these thoughts, Marina returned to her computer. A long day of research and investigation lay ahead. She knew that every second counted, for somewhere out there in Quiet Bay, a killer might be lurking, ready to do anything to keep their secrets hidden. Chapter 3. First Suspicions. The dim light of the desk lamp cast eerie shadows on the walls of the garage, now transformed into Marina's makeshift laboratory. The air was thick with the scent of sea salt mingled with the sharp aroma of chemical reagents. Outside, the surf rumbled, its rhythmic roar seeming to count down the time slipping through their fingers. Marina leaned over the microscope, peering at the mysterious shard of glass found on the beach. Under magnification, she could make out a barely visible marking. CF Industries. Her heart began to race. This was the first concrete lead. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a piercing doorbell. Marina startled, straightening abruptly. The clock showed almost midnight. Who could be coming at such a late hour? Tom stood on the threshold, looking even more exhausted than he had that morning. His usually neat uniform was rumpled, and his eyes held a mix of anxiety and determination. "Got a minute?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "We need to talk." They settled in the garden behind the house. The cool night air was filled with the fragrance of blooming oleanders. Marina brought 2 cups of strong coffee, understanding that a long night lay ahead. "The official report is ready," Tom began, rubbing the bridge of his nose. In the streetlight, his face looked gaunt and aged. Accident during night diving. Supposedly, Fisher got tangled in seaweed and couldn't surface. "But you don't believe that?" Marina clarified, closely observing her friend's reaction. Tom shook his head, his gaze fixed on some distant point, as if he was seeing something beyond this garden. "Something's not right here." Fisher was too experienced for such a stupid mistake. Plus, I checked his equipment. It was in perfect condition. Marina thoughtfully twirled the cup in her hands. Steam from the coffee rose into the air, creating intricate patterns in the moonlight. "Tom, what do you know about CF Industries?" she asked, trying to keep her voice as casual as possible. "Chemical plant on the outskirts of town," Tom replied, frowning. "Why?" Marina told him about the glass shard and the marking. With each word, Tom's face grew more tense. "Interesting," he mused. "You know, there were rumors that Fisher was conducting some negotiations with that plant, but nobody knows about what exactly." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of an approaching car. Tires softly rustled on the graveled driveway. A young woman in a smart business suit stepped out of an elegant black sedan, its polished body reflecting the moonlight. "Sarah Fisher," Tom whispered. "John's daughter." Sarah strode purposefully towards them. There was tension in her gait, as if each step was a struggle. "Miss Volkova," she addressed Marina. Her voice sounded hoarse, as if she had been crying for a long time. "I was told you're interested in my father's death." Marina stood up, feeling her muscles tense. My condolences, Miss Fisher. I'm just helping with the investigation. Investigation? Sarah interrupted. Her voice held a mix of fear and hope. But it's been officially ruled an accident. Yes, but... Tom began. Listen. Sarah lowered her voice, nervously glancing around. Moonlight reflected in her wide eyes, full of anxiety. I know you suspect something, and you might be right. Marina and Tom exchanged glances. The air seemed to thicken with tension. What do you mean? Marina asked cautiously. Sarah looked around again, as if checking if anyone was eavesdropping. Her voice trembled as she spoke. My father had been acting strange lately. He was scared. He talked about some important documents that could change everything. What documents? Tom asked, leaning forward. I don't know exactly, Sarah shook her head. But I'm sure it's somehow connected to his latest projects, and to these strange changes in the bay. Marina felt her pulse quicken. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. Sarah, do you know anything about your father's connections with CF Industries? She asked, closely watching the woman's reaction. Sarah's eyes widened, a flicker of fear passing through them. How did you... She shook her head. Yes, there was some deal, but only my father knew the details, and possibly Michael. Your brother, Tom clarified. Sarah nodded, her face contorting with bitterness. Yes, but he's changed recently. Become secretive, aggressive. We barely speak anymore. Suddenly, the night's silence was broken by a loud car horn. A large black SUV stopped at the gates of the house, its headlights blindingly bright, illuminating the garden. Damn, it's Michael, Sarah whispered, her face paling. He shouldn't see me here. Please, be careful. And if you find anything, contact me. She quickly handed Marina a business card and hurried to her car, her heels clicking on the path, breaking the night silence. Michael Fisher emerged from the SUV and headed towards Marina and Tom. In the moonlight, his figure seemed ominous, like a predator out on a hunt. I hope you haven't forgotten about the confidentiality of the investigation, Deputy Sheriff, he asked Tom coldly. His voice was saturated with barely contained fury. Of course not, Mr. Fisher, Tom replied, trying to maintain composure. We were just discussing Miss Volkova's environmental project. Michael turned his piercing gaze to Marina. There was a threat in his eyes. Yes, I've heard about your project. You know, Miss Volkova, sometimes it's better not to dig too deep. You might find something not meant for outsiders' eyes. With these words, he turned and left, leaving an oppressive silence in his wake. Marina and Tom watched him go. The tension hanging in the air was almost palpable. Well, Marina said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. It looks like our investigation is getting more interesting. Tom nodded, his face grim. And more dangerous. Be careful, Marina. I feel we've touched on something serious. After Tom left, Marina returned to her laboratory. Now she had far more questions than answers. What was John Fisher hiding? What role did the chemical plant play in all this? And how deep did the roots of this mystery go? She turned on her computer and began searching for information about CF Industries. The monitor's glow cast a ghostly light on her concentrated face. Marina felt that the solution was close at hand, She just needed to correctly connect all the pieces of this mysterious puzzle. Outside, the sea continued to roar, its dark waters keeping their secrets. But Marina was determined to uncover them, no matter the cost. The night promised to be long, but she knew that every minute could bring her closer to the truth. A lonely seagull cried out in the distance, as if warning of the dangers that lay on this path. But Marina could no longer stop. She felt she was on the brink of something big, something that could change not only her life, but the fate of all of Quiet Bay. Chapter 4. Diving into the Past. Marina awoke to the first rays of sunlight filtering through the slats in the blinds. The night had been restless, her dreams filled with dark waters and shadows gliding across the sea floor. She stretched, feeling her muscles ache from the tension of the previous day. Glancing at the clock, Marina realized she had time before the library opened. She descended to the kitchen, where she found her father gazing thoughtfully out the window at the bay. "Good morning, little mermaid," he said without turning. "The sea is restless today." Marina approached him, peering at the horizon. Dark grey waves with white crests crashed against the shore. The sky overcast with low-hanging clouds. The landscape perfectly mirrored her inner state. "Dad," she began cautiously, "how long have you known John Fisher?" Jack Volkov turned to his daughter, his eyes filled with sadness and something else. "Concern?" "All my life, you could say," he replied after a pause. "We grew up together in this town. Used to be best friends." "Used to be?" Marina echoed. Her father sighed, his gaze drifting back to the sea. "People change, little mermaid. Sometimes not for the better." He said nothing more, but Marina sensed a whole story hidden behind those words, a story she had yet to uncover. The town library opened at 9 a.m., and Marina was the first visitor. The old red brick building held the scent of books and secrets from the past. Mrs. Parker, the elderly librarian, greeted her warmly from behind the counter. "Marina Volkova, it's been ages." Her eyes behind thick glasses sparkled with warmth. "How can I help you?" "Hello, Mrs. Parker." Marina smiled back, feeling a rush of childhood memories spent among these bookshelves. "I need old newspapers and documents about the founding of the Fisher Company and the development of industry in our town." Mrs. Parker looked at Marina with interest, a glimmer of understanding in her gaze. "Oh my, you're up to something interesting, aren't you?" She winked conspiratorially. "Come along. We have a whole archive in the basement." Descending into the dusty room filled with shelves, Marina began her research. Hours flew by as she immersed herself in Quiet Bay's history. Old photographs showed the town as it was decades ago. A small fishing village, gradually transforming into a thriving coastal town. Suddenly, her attention was caught by an article in a 30-year-old newspaper. The headline screamed, "Environmental Scandal in Quiet Bay, Fisher versus Activists." The article tailed a conflict between young entrepreneur John Fisher and a group of environmental activists protesting against the expansion of the fishing fleet and the construction of a new processing plant. "Curious," Marina murmured, feeling her heart begin to race. "What's curious?" a voice behind her asked. Marina startled and turned. Before her stood a tall man with greying hair and a penetrating gaze. His face seemed vaguely familiar, as if she had seen it in one of the old photographs. "Sorry, didn't mean to frighten you," the man smiled, though his eyes remained serious. I'm Alex Morrison. I saw you studying the old papers and couldn't help but be intrigued. Marina Volkova, she replied, shaking his extended hand. A sudden realization dawned on her. You were one of those activists? Alex smiled wider, but there was sadness in his smile. Yes, that was a long time ago. We were young and full of enthusiasm. Thought we could change the world. And what happened? Marina asked, feeling she was on the verge of an important discovery. Alex sighed, his gaze clouding over, as if looking through the years. Fisher turned out to be too influential. He had connections in the state government. Our protests fizzled out, and the plant was built. He paused as if gathering his thoughts. But you know what's strangest? A few years after that, Fisher suddenly became interested in environmental technologies. Started talking about sustainable fishing, invested in water treatment facilities. Marina frowned, feeling pieces of the puzzle starting to come together in her head. Why is that strange? Because it was completely unlike the John Fisher we knew, Alex replied, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. It was as if he had learned something that made him change his approach. Their conversation was interrupted by Marina's phone ringing. It was Tom. Marina, can you come to the sheriff's office? We have new information. 20 minutes later, Marina was in Tom's office. The room was filled with the smell of coffee and papers. Maps of the town and bay hung on the walls, covered in markings. Tom looked excited, his usually neat uniform rumpled as if he had spent all night at work. Look what we found in Fisher's belongings. Tom handed her a flash drive. His hand trembled slightly. There are encrypted files, but our techs managed to open one of them. It's part of some report on the water condition in the bay. And you know what's most interesting? The date on the document is the day before Fisher's death. Marina quickly scanned the document on Tom's computer screen. Her eyes widened in surprise and alarm. The report spoke of strange chemical compounds detected in the bay water, compounds that shouldn't be there. Tom, I need to take new water samples, she said, feeling adrenaline starting to pulse through her veins. And can you find out anything about deals between Fisher's company and CF Industries? Tom nodded, his face serious. I'll try. But be careful, Marina. I feel we're getting close to something dangerous. As she left the sheriff's office, Marina bumped into Michael Fisher. His gaze was cold and hostile, like a stormy sea. Miss Volkova, you continue to stick your nose where it doesn't belong, he hissed through clenched teeth. He smelled of expensive cologne and something else. Fear. I'm warning you for the last time. Stop this investigation. Otherwise the consequences might be unpleasant. When Michael left, Marina felt a chill run down her spine. She understood that she was getting closer to the truth, but she also realized that the danger was becoming more real. In the evening, sitting in her makeshift laboratory, Marina analyzed everything she had learned that day. The town's history, environmental protests, John Fisher's strange behavior, the mysterious water report. How was it all connected? And what role did CF Industries play in all of this? Outside, the sea rumbled, as if trying to tell its own story. Marina approached the window, peering into the dark waters of the bay. Somewhere out there, in the depths, lay the answers to all her questions. She knew the answers were close at hand, and she was determined to find them, despite all the threats and dangers. Marina felt she was on the brink of a discovery that could change not only her life, but the fate of all of Quiet Bay. With this thought, she returned to her computer, ready to spend another sleepless night in search of the truth. The secrets of Quiet Bay were waiting to be uncovered, and Marina was determined to tear away the veil of secrecy, whatever the cost. Chapter 5. Dark Waters. The pre-dawn twilight enveloped Quiet Bay as Marina carefully descended the dew-slick wooden steps to the small pier. The air was thick with the smell of salt and seaweed, and something else, an elusive aroma of mystery and danger. The sky to the east was beginning to lighten, promising a new day filled with discoveries and perhaps answers to the questions that had been tormenting her. Jake, the young assistant from the local university whom she had invited to help, was already waiting for her by the small research boat. His face was pale from lack of sleep and nervousness. "Good morning, Dr. Volkova," he greeted Marina, trying to stifle a yawn. "Are you sure now is a suitable time to go out to sea? The weather forecast isn't very encouraging." Marina scanned the horizon. Heavy leaden clouds hung low over the water, and the waves crashing against the shore seemed unusually dark and oily. "That's exactly why we need to go out now, Jake," she replied, loading equipment onto the boat. "If our suspicions are correct, the picture could change dramatically after the storm." The boat slowly pulled away from the pier, cutting through the unsettled waters of the bay. Marina stood at the bow, peering into the horizon. The wind was picking up, bringing with it the scent of the approaching storm and something else, an acrid chemical taste that made her throat itch. "Let's stop here," Marina commanded when they reached the middle of the bay. "We need to take water samples from different depths." Jake carefully maneuvered, keeping the boat in place while Marina lowered the water sampler into the water. The waves were getting higher, rocking the small vessel. "Be careful there," Jake called out, watching as Marina balanced on the edge of the boat. "These waters have become unpredictable lately." Marina nodded, pulling up the sampler. The dark water in the vial seemed almost alive, shimmering with strange rainbow streaks. "Strange," she muttered. "Jake, look at this." Jake came closer, his eyes widening in surprise and concern. "I've never seen anything like it. What could it be?" Marina shook her head. "I don't know yet, but we're going to find out." They took several more samples at different points in the bay. With each new sample, Marina's concern grew. Something was clearly wrong with these waters. Back on board after the last sample collection, Marina began conducting preliminary analysis using portable equipment. Her face grew grimmer as she studied the results. "This is impossible," she whispered, looking at the instrument readings. "The toxin levels are off the charts. How can anything even live here?" Suddenly, the boat was hit by a strong wave. Marina lost her balance and nearly fell overboard, but Jake managed to catch her. His face was pale with fear. "What was that?" he asked, looking around. Marina shrugged, trying to steady her shaking hands. "Probably just a wave. Okay, let's head back. We need to conduct a more detailed analysis in the lab." As they approached the shore, Marina noticed the dark silhouette of a large vessel on the horizon. It was moving towards the open sea, leaving a barely noticeable rainbow trail on the water's surface. "Jake, do you know what kind of ship that is?" she asked, squinting. The young man looked in the indicated direction. Looks like one of the CF Industries tankers. They often pass through here at night or early morning. Marina frowned. She remembered her father's words about Fisher's nighttime tanker runs and felt an uneasy knot form in her stomach. In the laboratory, Marina immersed herself in analyzing the samples. Hours flew by as she studied the water composition, compared results with historical data, tried to understand what could have caused such dramatic changes in the bay's ecosystem. Suddenly, the door burst open and Tom rushed in, looking agitated. His uniform was rumpled and his eyes were filled with worry. "Marina, we've got problems," he blurted out. "We just received a report about strange behavior of marine life in the northern part of the bay." Marina jumped up, feeling her heart start to race. "What? When did this happen?" "A few hours ago. Fishermen reported unusual fish behavior and strange currents in the bay. People are panicking. The press is already aware." Marina quickly put the facts together. "Tom, this is connected to the pollution. Look at these analysis results." She showed him the data on the computer screen. Tom whistled, his face paling. "Damn, this is a real environmental disaster. But who could?" He was interrupted by Marina's phone ringing. Sarah Fisher's name flashed on the screen. "Marina." Sarah's voice sounded frightened, almost hysterical. "I need to meet with you, immediately. I found something in my father's papers. Something about secret deliveries from CF Industries. It's terrible." "All right, Sarah. Where are you now?" Marina asked, feeling adrenaline begin to pulse through her veins. "I'm driving to the old lighthouse on Dolphin Point. Meet me there in half an hour. And be careful. I think I'm being followed." Marina turned to Tom, her eyes blazing with determination. "Let's go. I think we're about to get answers to our questions." They sped along the winding road to the lighthouse. The rain intensified, turning the road into a dangerous slippery ribbon. Marina held tightly to the door handle as Tom took sharp turns. Suddenly, in the rearview mirror, she noticed a black SUV rapidly approaching from behind. "Tom, we're being followed," she said tensely. Tom glanced in the mirror, his face hardening. "It's Michael Fisher's car. Hold on tight." He sharply turned onto a narrow side road leading through the forest. The pursuer didn't fall behind. Marina could feel her heart pounding, adrenaline skyrocketing. Suddenly, another car blocked the road ahead. Tom slammed on the brakes, tires screeching on the wet asphalt. Two burly men in dark suits got out of the car. "Get out!" one of them growled. "The boss wants to have a word with you." Marina and Tom exchanged glances. They understood they were in serious trouble. But they also knew that now they were closer than ever to uncovering the secret of Quiet Bay. As they were led to the car, Marina caught a glimpse of the old lighthouse in the distance. Its light flickered in the rainy haze, like a small beacon of hope. She hoped Sarah was safe, and that the documents she had found would help reveal the whole truth. Whatever this leads to, Marina thought as she got into the car, we have to see this through to the end. For John Fisher, for our town, and for all those who have suffered from this pollution. With this thought, she prepared herself to face those behind all this darkness. The rain intensified, drumming on the car roof, as if counting down the seconds to the inevitable climax of this grim story. Chapter 6. Surfacing Evidence. The grey dawn was barely breaking over Quiet Bay, its heavy clouds pregnant with rain and foreboding. The black SUV came to a halt outside an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The air was thick with the scent of salt and rust. The distant roar of waves crashing against the shore, a constant backdrop to the unfolding drama. Marina and Tom were roughly pushed out of the car. The gravel crunched unpleasantly beneath their feet, reminiscent of breaking bones. Before them, like a ghost from the past, stood Michael Fisher. His once impeccable appearance had given way to dishevelment. A crumpled suit, stubble on his face, and eyes inflamed from lack of sleep. A malicious smirk distorted his features, making him look like a cornered predator. "Well, Miss Volkova, had enough of playing detective?" he sneered, his voice rough as sandpaper on glass. Marina took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air fill her lungs. She forced herself to remain calm, though her heart was ready to leap out of her chest. "Michael, you're making a huge mistake," she replied evenly. "We know about the bay's pollution. This can't be stopped now." Michael laughed, but his laughter was devoid of mirth. It sounded like cracking ice, cold and dangerous. "Oh, you know nothing. You can't even imagine how deep this rabbit hole goes." At that moment, the rusty door of the warehouse creaked open. From the darkness, as if an actor stepping onto a stage, emerged another figure. The early morning light outlined his silhouette, and Marina recognized him. It was Robert Chase, CEO of CF Industries. His appearance was like the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. "Mr. Chase?" Tom exclaimed in surprise. His hand instinctively moved towards his belt, where his holster usually hung. "You're involved in this too?" Chase slowly approached. His expensive leather shoes left clear imprints in the dusty concrete. A cold smile appeared on his face, not reaching his eyes. "Involved? I started this, young man. 30 years ago, when John Fisher and I discovered what was in the bay." Marina felt a chill run down her spine. The wind from the bay intensified, bringing with it the smell of rotting seaweed, and something else, something unnatural. "What did you discover?" she asked, already guessing the answer. "Rare earth elements, Miss Volkova," Chase replied, his voice almost dreamy. "An entire deposit at the bottom of the bay, worth billions of dollars. Imagine, beneath these calm waters lies a true treasure." "But mining would destroy the bay's ecosystem," Marina objected. She remembered the dead fish floating on the surface of the water, and her voice trembled with suppressed anger. "That's exactly why we acted in secret," Michael interjected, his eyes feverishly bright. "For years, CF Industries conducted trial extractions under the guise of water purification. And my father's fishing company was a cover. The perfect plan." "But your father decided to bail," Chase added. His tone became hard as flint. Suddenly, his conscience started bothering him. He wanted to reveal everything. Can you imagine? 3 decades of work and suddenly, all down the drain. Marina and Tom exchanged glances. Their looks conveyed understanding. Now everything was falling into place. Every oddity, every inconsistency made sense in light of this monstrous revelation. "You killed him," Marina said quietly. It wasn't a question. Michael flinched, as if struck. For a moment, the mask of a cold-bloodedness slipped from his face, revealing a mix of guilt and fear. "It was an accident," he cried out. His voice broke, becoming almost pleading. "I just wanted to talk to him, convince him not to reveal the secret, but he wouldn't listen. He never listened to me." Suddenly, the silence was torn by the wail of police sirens. The sound grew, echoing off the walls of abandoned buildings, creating an eerie echo. Michael and Chase looked around frantically, like trapped animals. "This is the end, gentlemen," Tom said. His voice sounded confident, with a note of satisfaction. "While you were bringing us here, I managed to send a message to the sheriff. They know where we are." Within minutes, the warehouse was surrounded by police. The flashing lights of police cars painted the grey walls in surrealistic shades of blue and red. The sheriff, a burly man with a grey mustache, personally handcuffed Michael Fisher and Robert Chase. "You're under arrest on suspicion of John Fisher's murder and environmental crimes," he announced, his voice a mixture of triumph and bitterness. As the police took away the arrested men, Sarah Fisher ran up to Marina and Tom. Her heels clacked on the concrete, and her long hair fluttered in the wind. "Thank God you're all right," she exclaimed. Tears of relief stood in her eyes. "I found documents in my father's safe. Everything's there. Extraction plans, secret agreements. I handed them over to federal agents." Marina exhaled in relief. Finally, the truth was out. It felt as if a heavy burden had fallen from her shoulders. But their joy was short-lived. One of the police officers approached them. His face was as grim as a storm cloud. "Miss Volkova, we have a problem," he said. His voice was tense. "We received a message from the Coast Guard. They've detected significant changes in water temperature and composition in the bay. It seems the Neptune device is still operational." Marina felt as if the ground was slipping from under her feet. They had uncovered the conspiracy, but the ecological catastrophe was already unfolding. "We need to act quickly," she said, gathering her thoughts. Her voice sounded firm despite her inner panic. "Tom, contact the environmental services. Sarah will need help from volunteers, and I—" She looked towards the bay. In the distance, strange, swirling patterns could be seen on the water surface, ominous and threatening. "I'm heading to the laboratory. We need to find a way to minimize the damage." As they hurried to their cars, the morning sun finally broke through the clouds. Its rays painted the sky and water in blood-red tones, as if nature itself was mourning what was happening. Marina paused for a moment, looking at this apocalyptic landscape. She realized that their adventure was far from over. Uncovering the conspiracy was only the beginning. Now they faced a fight to save Quiet Bay and its unique ecosystem. She took a deep breath, tasting the salty air and a slight hint of something metallic. A new day brought new challenges, and Marina was ready to face them head-on. Because now something greater than just solving a crime was at stake. This was a fight for the future of their native land, for life in its waters and on its shores. With this thought, she got into the car and turned the ignition key. A long and difficult job lay ahead, but Marina knew they would manage. They had to.